the Bell. Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close starts right now.
And right now, we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostick alongside Scarlet Fu. We're counting you down to the closing bell, and here to help take us beyond the bell. It's a global simulcast with Massar and Tim Stenovec. Welcome to our audiences across Bloomberg Television, Radio Originals, and our partnership of those folks streaming on YouTube. Carol.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the earnings, right? Microsoft and Alphabet coming out after the closing bell. We have seen an uptick in the equity markets, although we've rolled over those highs. But I'm looking at Microsoft. Tim, it's up 1.8% in today's trade ahead of earnings.
Look, these earnings happening on a day where the Fed starts its two-day policy meeting. We hear from Jay Powell tomorrow, Scarlett. And just to think how much has shifted in just a few months, we're focused on two mega cap tech companies, which of course we'd always be. But the Fed has kind of taken a back seat because we know what's going to happen with the Fed. And, you know, I guess we're in almost a post-rate hike environment.
Right, because everyone's looking ahead to when the rate cuts will come. Yeah, there seems to be more clarity about the rate outlook. And the big question mark right now is whether these big tech companies deliver on their earnings promises and justify the gains that we've seen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, multiple expansion has been pretty fierce, at least when it comes to some of those individual names. But again, if you believe in some of that hype around AI and that there is substance behind it, maybe that multiple at 40 times doesn't look quite as expensive.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. We were just talking with Michael Sheldon over at Hightower RDM, and what he said, what's interesting in the markets and what he thinks is a positive is something we've talked about, the broadening out of some of the gains. It's not just about technology anymore, and he thinks financials and others, that has shown some strength in the market, and it's a good sign.
Absolutely, and I mean, we talk about on this day where the S&P 500, a modest rally, but what's leading that rally is not tech, it's materials. Materials as a group up about 2% here on the day. Big tech doing its part as well, up about 1% as a group. You put it all together here, and you still have a market relatively unchanged. All right, we have a lot of earnings to get to. The S&P 500 going to finish out the day up for a third straight day, 0.3%. The NASDAQ Composite up for a second day, up 0.6%. The Dow Jones Industrial Average only up 0.1%, but that's good enough for a 12th day of gains, longest a winning streak going back to 2017. If it hits 13 days, that would tie it for the longest winning streak for the Dow Jones Industrial Average since its inception more than a century ago. And real quickly, the Russell 2000 up for a second day here as well, only unchanged here on the day, only up by about a point or so.
Find that interesting, right? We should kind of stop talking about the Dow, and here we are talking about it again. Hence, though I am going to go to the S&P 500, Scarlett, because we are seeing most names in the index, although almost an even split, but 292 to the upside, 210 losing some ground today, one unchanged.
You know, I was looking at the performers, the best performers, the laggards, and it really feels like we've gone back to the old playbook of the tech companies leading the way and the banks lagging behind. And I believe we have some earnings crossing right now. We have Microsoft and Texas Instruments. Why don't we start with Microsoft? EPS, Carol, of $2.69 a share.
Yeah, let's get to it. So Microsoft crossing, as you said, fourth quarter revenue, $56.2 billion, folks. That is a beat. $55.49 billion was the estimate. Cloud revenue, this is such an important metric. We're focused on AI, but cloud is still so important. Fourth quarter intelligent cloud revenue, $23.99 billion. That's pretty much in line. The estimate was $23.8 billion. Fourth quarter EPS, we're looking at $2.69 a share. Productivity revenue, $18.29 billion. That's better than the street estimate of $18.1 billion. And personal computing revenue, $13.91 billion. That's a little bit better than the estimate of $13.58. Fourth quarter revenue, though, again, in total, slightly better than what the street was expecting, $56.19 billion, $55.49 billion. Microsoft right now, it's down about 2.5%, but it's bouncing around, Romaine.
Alphabet shares, Alphabet also coming out with its earnings right now. Here are your 2Q numbers. EPS, a beat at 144. The street on average was looking for 132. Revenue, that of course, when you back out those acquisition costs, coming in at about 62 billion. That's about 2 billion better than what the street was looking for. I'm going to go through a couple of these sectors just so you have some sense here of where the money's coming from. YouTube ad revenue, a beat, 7.67 billion. The street was looking for 7.4. Google Cloud coming in at about 8 billion. That's also a beat there here. And Google services revenue coming in at 66.29. That's when you put the TAC back in. That's also a beat here. So it looks like a beat all around. And a couple other just quick notes here, Tim and Carol. Looking at some headlines crossing the wire saying that Alphabet is taking actions to optimize their global office space.
Okay, I can read between the lines there.
Yeah.
I mean, Alphabet, a huge owner of real estate around the world. Here in New York City, a massive owner in downtown Manhattan, over near in the Chelsea area and right near Chelsea Market. And it means that, you know,
and
people
just sorry to interrupt you here.
Yeah, go ahead.
We're also getting a headline right now. Ruth Porat, the CFO at Alphabet, has now been promoted to the role of President and Chief Investment Officer.
Okay.
So we're going to definitely have to find out exactly what's going on there. But Ruth Porat, of course, the longtime CFO there, who we speak to almost every earnings season, is going to assume the role of President and Chief Investment Officer. And if you want to read in between the lines there, Tim, I don't think you have to.
Yeah. Alphabet announcing plans for CFO transition. Back to the real estate, though, this is something that we've seen from many tech companies around the world. As people haven't been coming into the office, Carol, and they've been working from home, they're scaling back on those real estate investments, like what Meta Platforms has done too.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting. And just going back to the changes at Alphabet, I mean, this, you know, right, in terms of, you know, putting the financial person in charge and transition, you do wonder about what's the future direction of the company, or what was going wrong, perhaps.
Yeah, or maybe what was going right. I mean, she had received.
Right.
I mean, she's obviously gotten a lot of accolades for the way that she's guided the finances of the company here. And there's always talk about the leadership roles that women have, and whether that's a dead-end job or whether it's going to lead to the ultimate goal, which is to be a CEO.
And the CIO position, perhaps suggesting that Alphabet is going to be making some acquisitions, has to manage its portfolio a little bit more aggressively or just in a higher profile way than what it's done so far. We also have earnings out of Texas Instruments, the chip maker. It sees third quarter revenue. I'm going to just start with the outlook here of $4.36 billion to $4.74 billion. The consensus estimate is for $4.59 billion. So certainly within that range. We also hear Texas Instruments saying it saw weakness in its end markets for the quarter that ended, except for automotive. So again, some bearish commentary from that perspective, but some candor when it comes to what its customers are demanding. EPS for the second quarter, $1.87 versus the previous year's $2.45. And on the top line, $4.53. $4.5 billion for revenue, versus a consensus estimate of $4.35 billion.
I want to get back to shares of Alphabet in the after hours are higher right now after announcing the second quarter results. As you mentioned, Chief Financial Officer Ruth Porat transitioning, appointment of President and Chief Investment Officer. I do want to talk about AI here, Carol, because that is really what investors are looking for. How does Alphabet, a company that is so dominant when it comes to search, planning to integrate AI into its search and make money when Microsoft has invested in OpenAI, when Microsoft is going all in on this, and when the concern is that companies like OpenAI threatened Google's dominance in search?
Well, and these transitions, right? We're so focused on artificial intelligence. Let's not forget, though, still Alphabet, it's all about search revenue. I mean, that is the big kahuna when you think about what moves the needle financially at that company. Romaine, what do you got?
I just want to jump actually off this. I had something to say about Alphabet, but I think we need to turn our attention real quickly here to PacWest. We're now getting confirmation here of that news that the Wall Street Journal broke a little bit earlier. The Bank of California does plan to buy PacWest. Now we're learning that this is going to be an all-stock deal here, and there does involve some private equity money. Warburg Pincus, among a group of private equity companies that will provide, it looks like about $400 million in equity at a minimum here. But the combined company is going to have to repay about $13 billion in borrowings, and those repayments are going to be refunded by asset sales here. So kind of a complicated deal that's going to include the need to raise some equity, the need to sell some assets, the need to swap some rates here. But overall, the real headline here is that PacWest now going to be absorbed by Bank of California.
All right, let me just jump in here because we have Visa reporting earnings as well, and this is an important read through on how higher rates and inflation are affecting consumer spending, particularly here in the U.S., and whether international revenue perhaps is making up for some of the weakness. Right now, on the third quarter numbers, it's a beat across the board here. For EPS, $2 versus $1.60 on an adjusted basis, also a beat by 5 cents. When it comes to net revenue, $8.1 billion. Analysts were looking for $8.06 billion. And total Visa processed transactions, $54 billion. Analysts were looking for $53.5 billion. And third quarter cross-border volumes at constant currency, up 17%. So there's that reflection of how cross-border spending is a bright spot because customers are swiping their Visa cards, they're going abroad, and they're using them.
I want to go back to Microsoft, still down about 2% in the aftermarkets. What I thought was kind of interesting is the company says it's going to provide guidance on the earnings call, which makes me wonder, okay, so they're not laying it out here, and we're going to have to wait to hear a little bit more about the outlook. And we've talked a lot about, right, so much enthusiasm, Romaine, about this name surrounding AI.
Yeah.
I get it. But many, including Anurag Rana, who I was listening to Surveillance this morning, saying it's going to take a while for this to really pan out.
And we should just point out, Carol, I mean, Microsoft tends to do that. They tend to sort of not put the forward-looking guidance in the statement. Basically, you have to tune into the conference call to get that here. But your point is well taken. I'm wondering if we can go back for a second to Alphabet here and the promotion, if you will, of Ruth Porat. In the press release, it's interesting. They point out that she's going to retain her CF role. So remember, she's CFO now. She's going to retain that role. So she's basically adding 2 additional roles as Chief Investment Officer and President, reporting, of course, directly to Sundar Pichai, who she's always reported to. But in here, they talk about how she's going to be responsible directly for managing the investments in that other bets portfolio. And remember, they had kind of minimized the emphasis on that portfolio over the last couple of years. I think as investors got a little frustrated that they were spending a lot of money there and not necessarily showing a profit for it. But the idea that she is going there, and they specifically talk about her financial discipline in other areas and how she can bring that to the other bets realm, I think is somewhat interesting here.
Well, it's definitely broadening out, right? And it's much, a more senior role, if you will, right? And she still reports to the CEI. So you do wonder how much she will be involved in terms of strategy going forward. Already involved, right, as the CFO of this company.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, guys, a lot happening, and we're seeing these stocks move in the after hours. So a lot we'll be watching out to on those earnings calls. All right, that's a wrap. Our cross-platform coverage, radio, TV, YouTube, and of course, Bloomberg Originals breaking down those earnings, and of course, getting confirmation of that Bank of California PacWest deal. That's a wrap. Radio, TV, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals. We'll see you again tomorrow.